The pain never stops. Even now, decades after Mustafar, after the surgery that bound me to this armor, after the rage and hatred calcified into something cold and permanent, the pain continues, a constant reminder of what I was and what I have become. The respirator's rhythm marks my existence. Breath in, mechanical hiss, breath out, endless cycle. I am recording this in secret, in the meditation chamber aboard the Executor, the only place in the galaxy where I can be alone with what remains of my thoughts. You will never hear this while I live. Perhaps no one ever will. But I need to speak it, need to confess what the legends and propaganda will never tell you, need to preserve some truth before the man I was disappears entirely into the machine I have become. I was born Anakin Skywalker on Tatooine in 41 BBY, though born feels too clean a word for what happened. My mother, Shmi Skywalker, told me there was no father, that she carried me, and I appeared. The Jedi later theorized I was conceived by the midichlorians themselves. The will of the Force made flesh, destiny incarnate. But on Tatooine, in the slave quarters of Mos Espa, I was just another piece of property owned by Watto, a Toydarian junk dealer whose wings buzzed with the same irritating frequency as the flies that gathered on the trash heaps outside our hovel. The twin suns burned overhead every day, turning the sand white-hot, baking the moisture from everything living. I learned early that Tatooine was a world that killed dreams, where the only mercy was that most people never dreamed in the first place. But I dreamed. Even as a child working in Watto's shop, my small hands assembling and repairing machinery I barely understood, I dreamed of something beyond the endless dunes, beyond slavery, beyond the casual cruelty that defined life on the outer rim. My mother was the center of my universe. Shmi Skywalker was not educated, not powerful, not important by any measure the galaxy recognized, but she was kind in a world that rewarded cruelty, gentle in circumstances that demanded hardness, and she loved me with a fierceness that made me believe I might matter, might be something more than just another slave child destined to die young and unmourned. She told me stories at night, her voice soft in the darkness of our quarters, about angels from the moons of Iego, about heroes who fought for justice, about a galaxy so vast that somewhere in it there had to be a place where people like us were free. I built things to make her life easier, a protocol droid from spare parts I'd scavenged, C-3PO, who I programmed to help her with household tasks and translations when dealing with the various species that frequented Mos Espa. A pod racer assembled from components everyone else had discarded, because Watto liked to bet on the races, and I thought, if I could win, maybe he'd value us more, maybe he'd ease the conditions of our servitude. I was 9 years old, and I believed that excellence might earn love from beings incapable of that emotion. The pod race was where everything changed. A Jedi master named Qui-Gon Jinn arrived in Mos Espa, stranded, needing parts to repair his ship. He saw me and sensed something. The Force, though I didn't understand that yet, just knew that sometimes I could feel things before they happened, could react faster than thinking should allow, could fix machines by intuition that went beyond training. He tested my blood and told my mother I had the highest midichlorian count he'd ever seen, higher even than Master Yoda. He said I might be the chosen one, prophesied to bring balance to the Force. I didn't care about prophecy. I cared that he offered freedom. He wagered my freedom on that pod race, bet that I could win against professional pilots with decades more experience, and I won because I had to, because losing meant staying on Tatooine forever, because the alternative was unthinkable. The race was a blur of speed and danger, engines screaming, sand flying, the taste of fear and exhilaration mixed together as I pushed the pod racer beyond its design limits, trusting instinct over reason. When I crossed the finish line first, I thought I'd won everything. But freedom came with a price I hadn't understood. Qui-Gon could only afford to free one of us. I had to leave my mother behind. I remember the moment I understood this, standing in our quarters for the last time, looking at her face as she smiled through tears and told me this was my chance, my destiny, that I shouldn't worry about her. I was 9 years old, and I was being forced to choose between my own freedom and abandoning the person I loved most. There was no choice, really. She made it for me, pushed me toward the opportunity, and I went because I was a child, and I trusted her judgment even as my heart broke. I promised I would return for her. I meant it. I remember taking one last look at Tatooine from Qui-Gon's ship, watching the desert planet shrink to a point of light, and swearing to myself that I would come back, that I would free her, that this separation was temporary. I believed that. I believed so many things then. Qui-Gon died. We traveled to Naboo, got caught in a conflict between the Trade Federation and the planet's government, and I accidentally destroyed the droid control ship by flying a starfighter into the enemy command center, a child's desperate gambit that somehow succeeded and made me briefly famous. But during the battle on the planet's surface, Qui-Gon fought a Sith Lord and was killed before my eyes. I watched the lightsaber pierce his chest, watched the light fade from his eyes, and I understood for the first time that heroes could die, that justice didn't always prevail, that the galaxy was crueler than my mother's stories had suggested. His apprentice, Obi-Wan Kenobi, killed the Sith and took me as his Padawan, honoring Qui-Gon's dying wish that I be trained as a Jedi. I was brought to Coruscant, to the Jedi Temple, that massive structure of marble and ancient stone where the Order had maintained peace and justice in the galaxy for 1,000 generations. I should have been grateful. I should have embraced this opportunity to become something greater than a slave child from the desert. But the temple felt cold. The Jedi Council tested me, judged me, and I sensed their fear of me, of what I represented, of the prophecy that said I would bring balance. Master Yoda, ancient and wise, looked into my heart and saw the attachment I carried, my love for my mother, the fear of losing her. He said I was too old to begin the training, that I had too much fear in me. Fear leads to anger, he taught. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering. He was right about everything, except whether that knowledge would save me. Obi-Wan trained me despite the Council's reservations. He was young for a full Jedi Knight, barely more than a Padawan himself, suddenly burdened with a child everyone whispered was either the chosen one or a disaster waiting to happen. He tried his best. I understand that now, decades later, after I've had time to reflect on how difficult I made his task. He taught me the Jedi Code. There is no emotion. There is peace. There is no ignorance. There is knowledge. There is no passion. There is serenity. There is no chaos. There is harmony. There is no death. There is the Force. I memorized it. I never believed it. How could I embrace no emotion when I remembered my mother's love? How could I accept no passion when passion was what made life worth living? The Jedi preached detachment, but detachment felt like death, like becoming less than human, like sacrificing everything that made existence meaningful in exchange for power and purpose I wasn't sure I wanted. But I tried. For 10 years, I trained under Obi-Wan, learning lightsaber forms and Force techniques, studying the ancient texts, accompanying him on missions across the galaxy. I grew powerful quickly. The Force responded to me in ways it didn't respond to others, and I could perform feats that took other Jedi decades to master. I was arrogant about this. I believed my power meant I was special, that the rules applied to others but not to me, that destiny exempted me from limitations. Obi-Wan tried to teach me humility. He was patient when I was reckless, calm when I was angry, measured when I was impulsive. He called me his brother, and I loved him for that, though I rarely showed it in ways he could recognize. The Jedi didn't encourage emotional expression, and I learned to hide what I felt, to present the serene face they expected, while inside I churned with feelings I had no proper outlet for: frustration at the Order's restrictions, resentment at their constant judgment, fear that gnawed at me whenever I thought about my mother still on Tatooine, still enslaved while I lived in luxury on Coruscant and did nothing to help her. I had nightmares, dreams of my mother suffering, calling for me, dying alone in the desert while I was too far away to save her. The Jedi taught that visions of the future were unreliable, that they showed possibilities rather than certainties, that attachment to outcome led to the dark side. They taught meditation techniques to release these fears into the Force, to accept that I couldn't control everything, that some suffering was inevitable and trying to prevent it all would destroy me. I couldn't do it. I couldn't release her. She was my mother, and I had promised to return for her, and every day I spent at the temple while she remained enslaved felt like betrayal, like becoming complicit in the system that had owned us both. When I was 19, I returned to Tatooine. I'd been assigned to protect Senator Padme Amidala of Naboo, the former queen I'd met as a 9-year-old child, now a woman of extraordinary intelligence and compassion, someone who looked at me and saw a person rather than a prophecy. I'd fallen in love with her immediately upon seeing her again, though I hid it, knowing the Jedi forbade attachment, knowing Obi-Wan would disapprove, knowing I was violating every principle of the Order I'd sworn to serve. But first, I went home. I found my mother had been freed from Watto, purchased by a moisture farmer named Cliegg Lars, who'd fallen in love with her and married her. I felt a surge of relief. She was free, she was cared for, my promise had been fulfilled by someone else. But when I arrived at the Lars homestead, Cliegg told me she'd been captured by Tusken raiders a month earlier, that a rescue party had gone after her and been slaughtered, that she was certainly dead by now, and I should make my peace with that. I couldn't accept it. I took a speeder bike and rode into the desert, following the Force like a beacon, sensing her presence growing weaker with each moment. I found the Tusken camp and felt her there, barely alive in one of their tents. I infiltrated at night, moving through the camp like a shadow, and found her bound and beaten, tortured for a month by beings who saw her as less than human. She recognized me, opened her eyes and saw her son, and she smiled, despite everything they'd done to her. "Ani?" she whispered, using my childhood name. "Is it really you?" "I'm here, Mom," I said, cutting her bonds, gathering her into my arms. "I'm here. You're safe now. You're free." "You look so handsome," she said, her hand touching my face. "My son. My grown son. I'm so proud of you, Ani. So proud." Her voice faded. I felt her life slipping away, felt the Force leaving her body, and I screamed, not out loud, but through the Force itself, a wave of anguish and rage that probably echoed across the planet. She died in my arms. I knelt there holding her body, and something inside me shattered. I had promised to return for her. I had promised to free her. I had the power of the Chosen One, the highest midichlorian count ever, recorded abilities that made me special, and none of it had mattered. She'd died suffering while I'd played at being a Jedi, following rules that forbade attachment, serving an order that preached peace while slaves suffered across the galaxy. I laid her body down gently, then I stood, ignited my lightsaber, and killed every Tusken in that camp. Men, women, children, I slaughtered them all. I didn't distinguish between warriors and innocents. I didn't care. They had taken my mother from me, and I made them pay. The rage felt good, felt righteous, felt like the only honest response to a universe that killed mothers and called it inevitable. The dark side sang in my veins, feeding on my hatred, growing stronger with each life I took, and I let it, embraced it, because what the Jedi called darkness felt like justice. When it was over, when the camp was silent and the sand was dark with blood, I stood among the bodies and felt nothing. No remorse, no guilt, just empty rage and the taste of ash. I had crossed a line the Jedi taught was uncrossable, committed an atrocity that would have seen me expelled from the Order if they'd known. But they didn't know. I never told them. I told only Padme, and she didn't turn away from me, didn't condemn me, just held me while I wept and told me I was human, that grief drove people to darkness, that she understood. Her acceptance meant everything. The Jedi would have judged me, would have seen my actions as proof that I was dangerous, that Master Yoda's fears had been justified. But Padme saw me as a person in pain rather than a moral failure, and I loved her even more for that. I needed someone who would accept all of me, the anger and the fear and the grief, not just the parts that fit Jedi expectations. The Clone Wars began shortly after. The Republic was suddenly at war with a separatist movement, and the Jedi were conscripted as generals, peacekeepers forced to become warriors leading armies of clone soldiers bred specifically for combat. I was given command of the 501st Legion, thousands of identical men with accelerated aging, engineered to be loyal and expendable, fighting and dying for a republic that saw them as property. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been born a slave and now commanded an army of slaves, even if no one called them that. The clones called me general and followed my orders without question, and I tried to treat them as individuals, learning their names, honoring their sacrifices. But the system was too large, too impersonal. They died in thousands, and new batches arrived from Camino to replace them, and the war ground on. I was good at war, too good. The skills I'd developed as a Jedi translated perfectly to command. Tactical thinking, quick reflexes, the ability to sense my enemy's intentions through the Force. I won battles that should have been unwinnable, saved clone units that should have been lost, became famous across the Republic as the hero with no fear. Propaganda painted me as the embodiment of everything good about the war effort, and I believed it. Thought I was serving justice, protecting innocence, defending democracy. But war changes you. I watched friends die. I made decisions that sent soldiers to their deaths. I compromised principles I'd thought were absolute, telling myself that winning was more important than maintaining moral purity, that small evils were acceptable if they prevented larger ones. The Jedi Code said there was no chaos, only harmony, but war was chaos incarnate, and harmony felt like a lie we told ourselves to pretend we weren't becoming monsters. I married Padme in secret. The Jedi forbade attachment, but I couldn't obey that prohibition any more than I could stop breathing. She was the one person who saw all of me, the hero and the murderer, the Jedi and the slave child, the man who wanted to save everyone and the man who'd slaughtered innocents in rage. She loved me anyway, and I needed that love the way I needed oxygen. We held the ceremony on Naboo, just the two of us, and a holy man who asked no questions, and it was the happiest moment of my life, a brief, perfect instant where I wasn't the chosen one or General Skywalker or anyone's weapon, just a man in love with a woman who loved him back. But I couldn't tell anyone. Obi-Wan didn't know. The Council didn't know. I maintained the lie of the emotionless Jedi while spending stolen moments with my wife, living a double life that grew more complicated with each passing month. The deception weighed on me. I was violating the code, betraying the Order's trust, risking everything for a relationship they'd taught me was dangerous, and part of me knew they might be right, but I couldn't give her up. The visions started again 3 years into the war. Dreams of Padme dying in childbirth, screaming my name, begging me to save her while I stood helpless, watching her die like I'd watched my mother die. I woke gasping, drenched in sweat, the respirator rhythm already haunting me, though I didn't yet understand why. The dreams felt prophetic, felt like the Force showing me the future, and I was terrified because I knew how the Force's visions worked. They showed possibilities that became certainties if you tried too hard to prevent them. But I couldn't accept losing her. Not after my mother. Not after everything I'd already sacrificed. I searched for answers, studied ancient texts, asked indirect questions about preventing death, about healing, about the Force's power over life itself. The Jedi had no answers. They taught acceptance of death as natural, release into the Force as the proper end of life, detachment from outcome as the path to peace. I needed more than acceptance. I needed power, power to prevent the vision from coming true, power to protect the one person I couldn't lose, power to finally fulfill my promise to save the people I loved instead of failing them. Chancellor Palpatine offered that power. I'd known him for years. He'd been a mentor figure since I first arrived on Coruscant. Someone who took special interest in my career, who encouraged my development, who told me I was destined for greatness, beyond what the Jedi Council's narrow vision allowed. The Jedi Council didn't trust him, wanted me to spy on him, to report his activities, and I'd agreed because I was a Jedi Knight and they were my superiors, even though I resented their request. But Palpatine revealed himself to me, told me he was a Sith Lord, Darth Sidious, the master of the apprentice Qui-Gon had killed years ago, the hidden architect of the Clone Wars, the being who'd manipulated both sides of the conflict to position himself for ultimate power. He told me the Jedi and Sith weren't so different, that both used the Force, but the Sith acknowledged its full potential, while the Jedi crippled themselves with fear of darkness. He told me the dark side offered power the Jedi couldn't match, power over life and death itself, the power to save Padme. I should have arrested him, should have ignited my lightsaber and struck him down, fulfilled my duty as a Jedi, protected the Republic from the Sith corruption that had been growing in its heart for decades. Instead, I listened, because he was offering what I needed most, hope. The Jedi offered acceptance of death. The Sith offered the power to prevent it. The choice felt obvious. I told Mace Windu that Palpatine was the Sith Lord we'd been searching for. Windu took Jedi Masters to arrest him, and I stayed behind as ordered, trying to meditate, trying to find clarity, but clarity didn't come. Only fear. Fear that if the Jedi killed Palpatine, I'd lose my only chance to save Padme. Fear that the visions would come true and I'd be helpless again, watching someone I loved die while I had the power to prevent it, but not the knowledge. I couldn't let that happen. I went to the Chancellor's office and arrived as Windu was about to execute Palpatine, the Sith Lord disarmed and helpless. Windu said Palpatine was too dangerous to be left alive, that he controlled the Senate, that he had to die for the Republic to be free. And I believed him. But I also knew that if Palpatine died, my chance to save Padme died with him. "I need him!" I shouted, positioning myself between them. "Don't kill him. He must stand trial." Windu looked at me with disappointment and understanding mixed together. He knew. In that moment, he saw what I'd become, saw that I'd already fallen, that my attachment had compromised me beyond recovery. "He has control of the Senate and the courts," Windu said. "He's too dangerous to be left alive." He was right. I knew he was right. But when he raised his lightsaber to strike the killing blow, I couldn't let it happen. I ignited my own blade and severed Windu's sword arm. Palpatine, no longer helpless, unleashed Force lightning that threw Windu through the window, and the greatest duelist in the Jedi Order fell, screaming to his death hundreds of stories below. I stood there trembling, staring at my blade, understanding what I'd just done. I'd killed a Jedi Master. I'd saved a Sith Lord. I'd crossed the line from which there was no return. made the choice that would define everything that came after. The smell of ozone and burned flesh filled my nostrils. My hand shook, and Palpatine smiled. "You have done well, my new apprentice," he said, his voice warm with satisfaction. "The Force is strong with you. A powerful Sith you will become. Henceforth, you shall be known as Darth Vader." Darth Vader. The name felt heavy, felt like chains wrapping around what remained of Anakin Skywalker, but I accepted it because I'd made my choice, and there was no reversing it now. Palpatine told me the Jedi were traitors plotting to overthrow the Republic, that they had to be eliminated for peace and security, that Order 66 would activate the clone troopers' programming to execute their Jedi commanders. He said once the Jedi were destroyed, once the Separatist leaders were eliminated, once order was restored, he would teach me the power to save Padme. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. I needed it to be true because otherwise everything I'd just done was meaningless atrocity, betrayal for nothing, murder of my friends and brothers in exchange for empty promises. I led the 501st to the temple, my own legion, the clones I'd commanded and fought beside for 3 years, marching on the home of the order I'd served since childhood. We stormed the building and killed everyone inside, masters, knights, padawans, younglings who'd barely begun their training. The building that had felt cold to me as a child now burned with the heat of betrayal and slaughter. I cut down Jedi I'd known for years, beings who'd taught me and trusted me, who looked at me with confusion and betrayal as my blue blade, I hadn't yet built a red one, pierced their hearts. The younglings were the worst. Children younger than I'd been when Qui-Gon found me, hiding in the council chambers, hoping they'd be safe. They recognized me, called me Master Skywalker, asked me what they should do. I ignited my lightsaber. They were witnesses, loose ends, and Palpatine had been clear about leaving none. But more than that, some dark part of me wanted to burn away everything I'd been, wanted to commit an act so horrific that Anakin Skywalker couldn't exist anymore, that only Vader would remain. I killed them, all of them. Their small bodies fell, and I felt nothing. Nothing except the dark side growing stronger, feeding on death and betrayal, remaking me into something that could commit these atrocities without breaking. The Force itself seemed to recoil from what I'd done, and I grabbed that recoil and pulled darkness over myself like a cloak, embracing what I was becoming because the alternative was facing what I'd done, and I couldn't, not yet. Padme found me on Mustafar, where I'd gone, to eliminate the Separatist leadership, completing Palpatine's plan. She'd learned what I'd done, couldn't believe it, begged me to stop, to come back to her, to be the man she'd married. But I wasn't that man anymore. That man had died in the temple along with the Jedi. I tried to explain that I'd done it all for her, that I'd gained power that would save her, that we could rule together and make the galaxy what we wanted it to be. She looked at me with horror. "I don't know you anymore," she said. "You're breaking my heart. You're going down a path I can't follow." Then Obi-Wan appeared. She'd led him to me, unintentionally or otherwise. My brother, my master, my friend. He stood there in his Jedi robes with disappointed eyes and said, "Chancellor Palpatine is evil." "From my point of view, the Jedi are evil," I shot back, and I believed it in that moment, needed to believe it, because if the Jedi weren't evil, then I was, and I couldn't accept that yet. We fought. Master and apprentice, brother against brother, everything our relationship had been distilled into pure violence. His blue blade against mine, lightsabers clashing and humming. The unique sound I'd heard in training for a decade now turned to lethal purpose. We fought through the Separatist facility, through rivers of lava, across platforms that buckled and collapsed, and I realized as we fought that he was better than me. He'd always been better, more disciplined, more controlled, more grounded in the light. My power was greater but unfocused, fueled by rage that made me sloppy, and he exploited every opening my anger created. He maneuvered me to disadvantage, took the high ground on a bank above the lava river, and warned me not to try it. But I was arrogant, certain my power would overcome any tactical disadvantage, and I leaped. He struck as I rose, a single precise cut that severed both legs and my remaining arm. I collapsed on the volcanic shore, my limbs burning in the lava, and he stood over me with such profound sadness that it hurt worse than the physical pain. "You were the chosen one," he shouted, and I heard his grief, his betrayal. Everything he'd invested in training me turned to ash. "It was said that you would destroy the Sith, not join them. Bring balance to the Force, not leave it in darkness. You were my brother, Anakin. I loved you." Then he walked away, leaving me burning. The pain was beyond description. Flesh melting, nerves screaming, the smell of my own body burning, filling my nostrils and lungs. I should have died. I wanted to die, but hatred kept me alive. Hatred and the dark side feeding on my agony, and I lay there burning and screaming until Palpatine arrived and saved me. Saved me. That's what he called it. He put me in a medical capsule, took me to a facility on Coruscant, and rebuilt me with cybernetics and armor that would keep me alive, barely, for the decades to come. The surgery was agony. They replaced my legs with mechanical approximations. They fitted my ruined torso with a respirator because my lungs had been so damaged I couldn't breathe unassisted. They covered my burned flesh with armor that would contain and protect what remained of my body, and they sealed the mask over my face. I remember the moment it clicked into place, remember the first breath through the respirator, that mechanical hiss that has marked every moment of my existence since. Everything changed with that breath. The world looked different through the mask's lenses, colors muted, perspective distorted. Sounds were filtered through the helmet's audio processors. I couldn't smell anything except the recycled air fed to me through tubes. I couldn't feel anything with the ruined nerve endings in what remained of my flesh. I was more machine than man. The thought occurred immediately, and with it came a deeper understanding. I was trapped. Trapped in this armor, trapped in this body, trapped in a life I couldn't escape even through death because the dark side wouldn't let me go, feeding on my suffering, keeping me alive to serve its purposes. I asked about Padme. Palpatine told me I'd killed her in my anger. The vision had come true. She'd died because of me, because of what I'd become, because every choice I'd made to save her had instead destroyed her. The prophecy had proven self-fulfilling, my attempts to prevent her death creating the circumstances that caused it. I screamed. The sound echoed through the facility, amplified by the mask, distorted into something inhuman. I reached for the Force and tore apart the medical bay, crushing droids and warping metal, letting rage and grief consume me because they were all I had left. Everything I'd done had been for nothing. My mother failed. Padme failed. The Jedi betrayed. Myself destroyed. I had nothing except the dark side and service to the Emperor, and I embraced that because the alternative was accepting that I'd thrown away everything meaningful for power that couldn't save anyone. But I learned later that Palpatine had lied. Padme hadn't died from my actions on Mustafar, at least not directly. She'd died in childbirth, heartbroken, giving birth to twins she hid from me, from the Emperor, from everyone who would have used them as weapons. Luke and Leia, my children, living proof that something good had survived the catastrophe I'd created. But I didn't know this for 2 decades, didn't know they existed until Luke destroyed the Death Star, and I felt his presence in the Force like an echo of everything I'd lost. Those 20 years were an eternity. I became the Emperor's enforcer, his right hand, hunting down surviving Jedi and crushing any resistance to Imperial authority. I killed countless beings in service to the Empire, Jedi masters who'd escaped Order 66, rebels who dared to hope for freedom, innocents who had the misfortune to be in the way of imperial objectives. The dark side grew stronger with each death, grew heavier, and I wore it like the armor that encased my body, necessary, burdensome, inescapable. I hunted Jedi with particular intensity. Each one I killed was a ghost I silenced, a witness to what I'd been before Vader. They looked at me and remembered Anakin Skywalker, the chosen one, the hero who'd become a monster, and I couldn't bear that recognition, so I eliminated them one by one until the Jedi were nearly extinct and the Force itself seemed diminished by their absence. I trained Inquisitors, fallen Jedi who served the Empire, hunting their former brothers and sisters in exchange for power and survival. They were what I might have become if I'd been less powerful, less important to Palpatine's plans. Tools used and discarded, fed just enough dark side knowledge to be useful, but kept weak enough to be controlled. I despised them even as I commanded them, saw in them the pathetic compromise I'd avoided through sheer power and the Emperor's favor. The Empire spread across the galaxy like a disease. Worlds were subjugated, species enslaved, dissent crushed. I participated in all of it, enforced the order Palpatine established, told myself this was necessary for galactic peace, even as I watched atrocities become routine. The Death Star was built, a weapon capable of destroying entire planets, conceived and constructed by beings who thought power on that scale would ensure compliance, would make resistance impossible. I objected to the Death Star, not on moral grounds. I'd lost the right to moral objections long ago, but on practical ones. The ability to destroy a planet was insignificant next to the power of the Force, and relying on technological terror rather than Force dominance seemed short-sighted. But Palpatine and his advisors overruled me, convinced that inspiring fear through overwhelming force was the key to maintaining control. They were wrong. The Death Star's destruction of Alderaan, Padmé's adopted homeworld, the planet that had given her political start, home to billions of innocents, galvanized the rebellion rather than crushing it. The atrocity was too large, too blatant, and even beings who'd been willing to accept incremental oppression couldn't ignore the casual annihilation of an entire world. And then Luke Skywalker destroyed the Death Star, and I felt him in the Force. My son, alive, strong, trained in the Jedi arts by Obi-Wan, who'd survived and hidden on Tatooine all these years. The realization shattered something in me. Padmé had lived long enough to give birth. My children had survived. The Emperor had lied to me, had hidden this from me, had manipulated my grief to ensure my continued service. I should have felt rage at the deception. Instead, I felt hope, a dangerous emotion I thought I'd burned away on Mustafar. My son was alive. My bloodline continued. Something of Anakin Skywalker remained in the galaxy beyond the machine I'd become. I hunted Luke, tried to find him, tried to turn him to the dark side, tried to convince him we could rule together as father and son. The Emperor wanted Luke dead or converted, and I pursued both options, telling myself I was serving my master while secretly hoping I could save my son from the choices I'd made, could give him power without the suffering that had defined my path. We dueled on Bespin. I cut off his hand, deliberately mirroring what Obi-Wan had done to me, what I'd done to Count Dooku, and revealed the truth. No, I am your father. I saw the denial in his eyes, the horror, the refusal to accept that the monster he'd been fighting was his own blood. He chose to fall rather than join me, threw himself into the abyss rather than take my hand. And I understood in that moment that I'd become exactly what my son would die to avoid becoming. But he survived. He escaped. And over the following year, I felt him growing stronger, more skilled, more grounded in the light. He reminded me of Obi-Wan, same certainty, same moral clarity, Same infuriating insistence that there was still good in me, still something worth saving in the burned ruins of Anakin Skywalker. He was wrong, I told myself. Anakin Skywalker was dead. I'd killed him on Mustafar, in the temple, in every choice that led me to darkness. Only Vader remained, and Vader served the Emperor, and that would never change, because change required strength I no longer possessed, required hope I'd surrendered decades ago. But he didn't give up. When I brought him before the Emperor on the second Death Star, when Palpatine tried to corrupt him as he'd corrupted me, when he forced Luke to choose between killing me or watching his friends die, Luke refused both options. He threw away his lightsaber and faced the Emperor unarmed, declared himself a Jedi like his father before him, and accepted death rather than compromise his principles. The Emperor tortured him for that defiance. Lightning poured from Palpatine's fingers, blue-white energy that burned and devastated, and Luke screamed and writhed and died by inches while I stood and watched. The Emperor laughed, enjoying my son's suffering, and I stood there in my armor, breathing my mechanical breath, and felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Choice, not obligation, not programming, not the dark side's commands or the Emperor's orders or destiny's inevitable path. Just choice, pure and simple. Watch my son die or save him. Luke looked at me through the torture, his eyes finding mine through the mask's lenses, and he didn't plead, didn't beg, just looked at me with absolute faith that I would do the right thing, that somewhere underneath the armor and the hatred and the decades of atrocity, his father still existed and would save him. He was right. I grabbed the Emperor, my master for 24 years, the being who'd orchestrated my fall and used my suffering, and I threw him down the reactor shaft. His lightning coursed through me, devastating my life support systems, killing me as surely as if he'd struck me with a lightsaber. But I didn't care. My son was screaming, and I was finally making the choice I should have made decades earlier. The choice to sacrifice power for love, to surrender control for connection, to embrace the light I'd abandoned. The Emperor fell, and his screams faded, and the dark side itself seemed to recoil from the throne room. Luke crawled to me, and I was dying, could feel the systems failing one by one, could taste death approaching like I'd tasted it on Mustafar before the dark side had sustained me. But this time was different. This time I welcomed it. This time I was ready. Luke wanted to save me, wanted to get me to a medical bay, but I knew it was too late. My systems were too damaged, and more than that, I was done. Done fighting, done serving, done being Vader. I asked Luke to remove my mask so I could see him with my own eyes, not filtered through technology, one last time. "But you'll die," he said. "Nothing can stop that now," I told him, and it was true, but it was also relief. "Just for once, let me look on you with my own eyes." He removed the mask. The air burned my ruined lungs, atmosphere I hadn't breathed unfiltered in decades, but I didn't care. I saw my son's face, really saw him, and he looked so much like Padme that my heart broke all over again. Everything I'd lost, everything I'd failed to save, all of it reflected in the features of the child who'd saved me instead. "You were right about me," I said, forcing words past damaged vocal cords. "Tell your sister. You were right." Then Anakin Skywalker died, and for a brief, perfect moment before the end, I wasn't Darth Vader anymore. I was just a man who'd made terrible choices, who'd caused infinite suffering, who'd betrayed everything and everyone he'd ever loved. But I was also a father who'd saved his son, and in that final act I found something I'd thought I'd destroyed forever. Redemption. The truth. I was the chosen one who brought balance by destroying the Jedi and the Sith both, by becoming the greatest monster the galaxy had known, and then choosing love over power at the last possible moment. Every choice I made to save the people I loved destroyed them instead, my mother, Padme, the Jedi, myself. Power couldn't save anyone. It only gave me more ways to fail spectacularly. For 40 years, I wore the armor and served darkness and told myself Anakin Skywalker was dead. But my son proved that lie. He believed in me when I didn't believe in myself, looked at the monster and saw his father, offered me redemption I didn't deserve and couldn't refuse. The tragedy wasn't becoming Vader. It was believing I couldn't stop being him. The transformation that destroyed me also preserved just enough humanity to matter in the end. Not enough to undo the damage, not enough to forgive what I did, but enough to choose light over darkness, son over master, love over fear. And that had to be enough.